their name and logo meant something. A symbol for a film that will blow you away with over-the-top action. And indeed they did, with films like the Rambo series, Total Recall, and Terminator 2 Judgment Day. They gave you films that blew your socks off. Just hope you have odor eaters. The name that meant big time, and indeed they were, with the budgets of the movies going well past the millions. But yet, with the money they spent, they slowly dug themselves into a hole until eventually it got too deep and were unable to climb out of. This is a story of an ambitious company founded by two very ambitious and innovative men who would climb all the way to the top before the wind blew and sent them falling back to Earth. The story that illustrates you can't just have a few big movies and expect things to go smoothly. This is the story of Carolco Pictures, the company who, in a span of a few years, went from a blockbuster churning machine to a big money losing mess. How did they have such a fall from grace? You will learn tonight as we will discuss the rise and fall of Carolco. The story begins with two men, each taking different paths in their film careers. Mario Kassar was born in Beirut, Lebanon, on October 10, 1951, and like him, his father was also an independent movie producer. By age 18, Mario had gained the rights to several French and Italian films and distributed them in the Far East, foreshadowing the innovative business practice of foreign distribution. Andrew G. Vajan was born in Budapest, Hungary on August 1, 1944. He immigrated to the United States when he was 12. By age 25, Vajan was living in Hong Kong working as a hairdresser and running a successful wig-making factory. In 1975, it would be like chocolate and peanut butter meeting together making that yummy Reese's Cups at the 1975 Cannes Film Festival, when Kassar and Vajan met for the first time, beginning a partnership that will last for a combined total of 21 years. In 1976, Kassar and Vajan formed Carolco. The name was brought from a defunct company in Panama, and according to Kassar, it has no meaning. In the early days, Kassar and Vajan would produce a number of films throughout the late 70s and early 80s. Carolco helped fund those films, but in 1980, they were looking to become a major. In 1972, David Morrell wrote the novel First Blood, a story about a Vietnam vet and drifter named Rambo, who hitchhiked into a Kentucky town where he ran into Sheriff Teasel, who dropped him off at city limits. However, Rambo returned, much to Teasel's dismay, and would arrest him. The police officers tortured Rambo, bringing back memories of Vietnam that ate at him. He then escapes, which leads into a huge manhunt where it's Rambo versus the town. The novel proved to be popular, with Hollywood keen on adapting it for the big screen. The first attempt at adapting First Blood was in 1972, when Morrell sold the film rights to Columbia Pictures for $75,000. Richard Brooks, who directed Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and Elmer Gantry, was attached to direct. Brooks worked on the project for a year, with the script that never got completed, and while he had no clue who would play Rambo, he did have Brent Lancaster and Lee Marvin in mind to play Sheriff Teasel, and Betty Davis as a psychiatrist for Rambo. Brooks' version of the film placed more emphasis on the sheriff. However, he was not satisfied with the script when Columbia was ready to film, and the project fell by the wayside. After that, Warner Brothers acquired the rights from Columbia for $125,000 and went through several directors including Martin Ritt, Sidney Pollack, Martin Bergman, and John Badham, before it was auctioned off to Filmways to be directed by John Frankenheimer. Brad Davis, fresh off the success of Midnight Express, was cast as Rambo, but after Orion took over Filmways, the project once again fell into limbo. In 1980, Carolco bought the rights from Warner Brothers for $375,000 and brought the script that was to be used for the Filmways version for $150,000. They brought on Ted Kotcheff to direct in exchange for them to fund one of his projects. Now they needed their man to play John Rambo. Several actors were considered such as Clint Eastwood, Robert De Niro, Paul Newman, Nick Nolte, Ryan O'Neal, James Garner, Chris Christopherson, Terrence Hill, Dustin Hoffman, John Travolta, and Steve McQueen. However, they found their man in Sylvester Stallone. Sylvester Stallone had found success with Rocky, the feel-good boxing movie about a small-time boxer looking to move up to the World Heavyweight Championship. The film was nominated for 10 Academy Awards, winning 3 of them including Best Picture, bringing Stallone to the top of the A-list. But other films he did after, with the exception of the 2 Rocky sequels, did not have a lot of success and was desperate for a hit. Stallone signed on to play Rambo. Using some of his clout, Stallone rewrote the script to make Rambo more sympathetic. In the book, he kills several people in violent manners. Stallone rewrote it to where he does not directly kill any police officers and National Guardsmen. He also allowed the character to live, in contrast to the book where he dies. Several revisions of the script were made with more work done by Larry Gross and David Giller. For the role of Teasel, Gene Hackman and Robert Duvall were approached to play him, but both actors turned it down and eventually Brian Dennehy was cast. For the role of Colonel Troutman, Kirk Douglas was originally cast but was dissatisfied with the ending of the script, where Rambo survives and left the project before filming began. Rock Hudson was considered to take over, but had to decline due to him having to undergo heart surgery. Richard Crenna will ultimately be cast. The film would begin shooting in the winter of 1981 in British Columbia, Canada, with the town scenes being shot in Hope, while everything else would be filmed at Golden Ears Provincial Park and Pitt Lake and Pitt Meadows. The first cut of the film was over 3 hours long. As Stallone hated it so much, he considered buying the film and destroying it. It would then be heavily edited where the final cut was 93 minutes long. On October 22, 1982, First Blood was released in theaters. While the reviews were mixed, the acting of Stallone, Dennehy, and Crenna was heavily praised. However, over time, the reception has gotten more positive. First Blood topped the box office in its opening weekend with over $6 million, then record for the best opening in October. It would stay on the top for 3 weeks straight, and with a budget of $14 million, the film made over $47 million domestically and $125 million worldwide, making it a big hit for Carolco. The focus of international success was quite innovative at the time, as no other studio, save for Canon, focused on worldwide distribution. This strategy would help out Carolco throughout its run. The major success of First Blood meant a sequel would be inevitable. A good thing for them, Stallone rewrote the script where John Rambo lives. Kirk Douglas may not have been happy with it, but Carolco would be laughing all the way to the bank pretty soon. John Rambo will return in Rambo, First Blood Part 2, with Stallone and Richard Crenna reprising their roles as Rambo and Troutman respectively. In the sequel, Rambo is in prison, where he is approached by Troutman to go to Vietnam to find some missing POWs. Rambo agrees, but neither man know that they are being used by the government for corrupt purposes. Also starring in the film is Charles Napier as Murdoch, a government official who bouts with Troutman, and Steve Burkoff as the villainous Lieutenant Colonel Brodowski. This outing would be directed by the late George P. Cosmatos, who directed the successful war movie Escape to Athena, and would find more success later on in Tombstone. The screenplay was written by James Cameron, not too long after the success of The Terminator. This will be the first film to be distributed by TriStar Pictures, a company founded in 1982 as a joint venture between Columbia Pictures, HBO, and CBS. And during this time, has not had much in the success department. The TriStar Carolco partnership will prove to be quite lucrative for the next 9 years. Rambo First Blood Part 2 was released on May 22, 1985. While critics did not take the film too warmly, it captured the patriotic mood perfectly, as it was released around the time of the 10th anniversary of America pulling out of Vietnam during the war and captivated audiences, making $150 million in the US and again worldwide revenue proved key as well, also making $150 million for the grand total of $300 million, all on a budget of $25.5 million. And more money was made off of merchandising and even a children's cartoon series. After all, it was the 1980s, and any bloody R-rated movie could be made into shows for kids. Again, with the franchise on their hands, Carolco was reaping the success, all thanks to them taking a gamble of Stallone revising the script. While they had nothing lined for 1986, 1987 brought 2 movies, The first being the horror thriller Angel Heart, based on the 1978 novel Falling Angel by William Hortzberg and directed by Alan Parker, who has such hits as Midnight Express, Fame, and Pink Floyd The Wall to his name. The movie centered around a private investigator named Harry Angel, played by Mickey Rourke, to find singer Johnny Favorite. But the investigation takes dark turns and Harry learns the dark, disturbing truth about the identity of Johnny Favorite. Also starring in the film is Robert De Niro as Louis Cypher, who hired Angel to find Favorite and is eventually revealed to be the devil, and Lisa Bonet as Epiphany Proudfoot, the daughter of Favorite and a woman he had an affair with. The presence of Lisa Bonet was quite controversial at the time, as she, then 19, was starring as Denise Huxtable on the family-friendly sitcom The Cosby Show, in a topless scene with Rourke, then 35, that lasted 10 seconds with blood pouring down a wall. The scene was trimmed to get an R rating, though was seen in the uncut X-rated version. Angel Heart was released on March 6, 1987. While the film pleased critics and horror fans, it wasn't successful, just breaking even with its budget at $17 million. Carolco's next film was the action film Extreme Prejudice, directed by Walter Hill of 48 Hours fame, and starred Nick Nolte as Jack Bentine, a Texas Ranger who goes after a drug ring ran by a former friend of his, played by Powers Booth. Also starring is Maria Conchita Alonso as Bentine's girlfriend, Rip Torn as Bentine's ill-fated partner, and Michael Ironside as a corrupt army major. The film was a homage of sorts to the wrestling film The Wild Bunch. The movie was once in development a decade earlier with the writer John Millis slated to direct, but went off to make Big Wednesday instead. Hill took over and had the screenplay rewritten. Originally slated as TriStar's Christmas 1986 release, it got postponed and was finally released on April 24, 1987 to good reviews. But the film flopped in theaters at $11 million on a budget of $22 million. Also during this time, Carolco acquired International Video Entertainment, a struggling video distributor who would release Carolco's films on home video. IVE itself was part of video distributor Family Home Entertainment, and the IVE name was used on non-family releases. In 1988, IVE and FHE would be consolidated into Live Entertainment, a joint venture between IVE and Lieberman. In 1990, IVE became Live Home Video. Also, in 1987, Carolco acquired Orbis Communications. Effective immediately, Carolco initiated television production and distribution. 1988 didn't start off great for Carolco, with the release of the animated movie Pound Puppies and the Legend of Big Paw. Based on the Tonka toy line of the same name, the movie centered around the Pound Puppies and Pound Purries, trying to take back the bone of scone, which helps humans understand the animals, from the villain Marvin McNasty. The design of the characters and the animation was not particularly well done. Pound Puppies was Carolco's only film made for kids. Despite this, critics and moviegoers passed on Pound Puppies when released on March 18, 1988. The film only earned $586,938. Early on in the decade, Carolco had jumped out of the gate with early success, but the company's 1987 and early 1988 showings underperformed. If Carolco was going to get back in the race, they needed something else to steer the horse back into competition, and what better person than John Rambo? Carolco went back to its roots with Rambo 3. In the third title in the series, John Rambo refused to go on a mission to help in the struggle in Afghanistan, with fighters facing off Soviet forces, because he is tired of fighting, but Troutman goes on the mission and gets imprisoned by the Soviets. Hearing about this, Rambo once again gears up and fights the bad guys. The production had some difficulties due to filming eventually resulting in the majority of the film's crew getting fired, which included the director of photography and the original director, Russell Mulcahy. Peter McDonald would take over the helm from Mulcahy, and while it was his first feature, he did not help direct some of the action scenes from the previous Rambo picture. Despite the difficulties during films, Rambo 3 was released on May 25, 1988. Like the previous film, critics didn't review it warmly, but it pleased audiences. The film disappointed domestically, making $53 million on its $58 to $63 million budget. but overseas would once again prove key, as it made $135.3 million, bringing the grand total to around $189 million. While not as profitable as Rambo First Blood Part 2, it still brought in the dough Carolco needed. The next film from Kassar and Vajna featured another actor who would prove key for Carolco's future success, the Syrian oak himself, Arnold Schwarzenegger, in Red Heat. For the movie, Arnie was paid $8 million for his role in A Habit for Carolco, paying the actors more money than regular studios. Schwarzenegger plays Captain Ivan Danko, a Moscow police officer who goes after a drug lord who escapes to America. Danko goes there to Chicago and teams up with Detective Sergeant Art Ridzik, played by James Belushi, trying and failing to live up to his late brother's John's shadow. And together they combat the drug lord. Red Heat has the distinction of being the first film allowed to film a scene at Moscow's Red Square. The rest of the USSR scenes were filmed in Hungary. The movie was directed by Extreme Prejudice and 48 Hours director Walter Hill, who longed to work with Schwarzenegger, and in the film, Hill toned down Arnold, making him more realistic and grittier. Red Heat was released on June 14, 1988 to mixed to positive reviews. On a budget of $29 million, it made $34 million, making it a modest hit that Carolco needed. Despite the two-punch, they still yet had to climb to the peak. Carolco would end 1988 with the November 11th release of Iron Eagle 2, the sequel to TriStar's 1986 film Iron Eagle, with Louis Gossett Jr. reprising his role as Chappie Sinclair, as he leads a group of pilots, both American and Soviet, to fly to the Middle East and strike a nuclear missile site. This was loosely based on Operation Opera, an event on June 7, 1981, where the Israeli Air Force struck a nuclear reactor in Baghdad, Iraq. The sequel was not well received by critics like the first one, and was also a weak performer, making $10 million. Carolco would begin 1989 with Deep Star 6, a sci-fi horror film about a crew in an underwater military post that gets attacked by a sea monster. Directed by Sean S. Cunningham, best known for directing the first Friday the 13th. Its stars included Greg Evigan, then starring in the NBC sitcom My Two Dads, Teron Black, Nancy Everhart, Cindy Pickett, Miguel Ferrer, and Matt McCoy. Deep Star 6 was among several underwater-themed movies that were released in 1989. Included MGM's Leviathan, The Evil Below, The Lords of the Deep, The Rift, and 20th Century Fox Abyss. Out of all of these, only The Abyss was successful. Deep Star 6 was released on January 13th and made a paltry $8 million and was panned by critics and moviegoers alike. For the next film, the prison thriller Lockup, they brought back Sylvester Stallone, hoping to hit pay dirt just like they did with Rambo, and produced the film under his production company White Eagle. In Lockup, Stallone plays Frank Leone, a model prisoner at a low-security prison who is about to get out when he is forcibly taken out of there into a maximum security prison by orders of corrupt warden Drumgoole, played by Donald Sutherland, who wishes to torture him because Frank had escaped from that prison under his watch despite him having a good reason to see his dying friend, and complains about the bad treatment, leaving Drumgoole very spiteful of Frank. The movie also stars Darlene Frugal, John Amos, Tom Sizemore, and Sonny Landham. Lockup was released on August 4th. Critics didn't like the movie and the film underperformed at $22 million on a $24 million budget. This film would be the only production of White Eagle, and the company would be absorbed into Carolco. After that came Johnny Handsome, again helmed by director Walter Hill and based on the novel The Three Worlds of Johnny Handsome by John Goldie. Mickey Rourke plays the title character, ironically named Johnny Handsome due to him having a disfigured face. Johnny and a friend attempt to rob a store with two other accomplices, played by Lance Henriksen and Ellen Barkin, when they betray the two, killing the friend and leaving Johnny to go to jail. While in jail, a young doctor, as portrayed by Forrest Whitaker, performs an experimental surgery on him which gives him a normal face, which makes him unrecognizable by his peers as he is released back into society. Despite him attempting to live a normal life, he still wishes to get back at the two that betrayed him. also starring Elizabeth McGovern as Johnny's girlfriend and Morgan Freeman as a cop on Johnny's back. Johnny Handsome got decent reviews by critics, but once again was not a strong performer when it came out on September 29, 1989, just making around $7 million. Around this time, Hollywood people were taking note of Carolco's spending. There were parties, private jets, generous dividends, the names of new movie deals lit up in fireworks, and stretch limos prowling around Bel Air with the company's name proudly emblazoned on the number plates, while meanwhile, people like Paul Verhoeven, Oliver Stone, and James Cameron were working on movie projects. It was during this time executive Andrew G. Vajna opposed the direction that Carolco was going. Vajna and Mario Kassar butted heads and wasn't helped by the fact that Peter Hoffman, a tax attorney who became president of the company in 1986, became Kassar's right-hand man and played them against each other. Eventually, Vajna left and was paid $100 million for his share in the company. In November 1989, Vajna would form his own production company, Synergy Pictures. Synergy would team up with the Walt Disney Company and release several films in the 1990s. With a few exceptions, none of Synergy's films were successful. Closed up shop in 1997. At the end of 1989, Carolco released Music Box, written by Joe Eszterhas, the Hungarian-American writer who would supply a major hit for Carolco in over 2 years' time. Music Box is a courtroom drama about an attorney named Ann Talbot, played by Jessica Lange, who has to defend her father in court, who is charged for war crimes. But as she digs into the case, she finds out some dark secrets. Released on December 22, 1989, Music Box received mixed reviews and made $6 million. Another weak performance for Carolco for an overall weak 1989. And the trend will continue on the beginning of the 1990s. Carolco started off 1990 with Mountains of the Moon, directed by Bob Rafelson, best known for 5 Easy Pieces and The Postman Always Rings Twice, and starring Patrick Bergin, Ian Glenn, Richard E. Grant, and Fiona Shaw. The movie centers around Richard Francis Burton and John Hanning Speck, played by Bergin and Glenn respectively, and their journey in Central Africa that leads them to find the source of the Nile River, as well as their rivalry between two men. Something of a dream project for Rafelson, Mountains of the Moon opened up in theaters on February 23, 1990 to positive reviews. Despite the critical acclaim, it was not a moneymaker, just earning $4 million. With a bad 1989 and a bittersweet start to 1990, Carolco was falling behind again and were still not considered a legitimate major. They needed something big to put them on top, and so they look on to their next project with their big player and Red Heat star Arnold Schwarzenegger. Total Recall, which Carolco released as their big summer 1990 release, starred Arnold Schwarzenegger as Quaid, a man who lived a simple life with his wife, or so he thought. After taking a virtual vacation, memories began to surface where he was a secret agent in Mars, leaving him questioning his identity, and the people he trusted turns against him, even his wife. Quaid goes to Mars to answer all his questions. The script for Total Recall was written by Alien writers Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett. After buying the rights to Philip K. Dick's short story, We Can Remember It For You wholesale. The script went from studio to studio and no one would back it up. In the mid-1980s, producer Dino De Laurentiis pursued to make the film under his new De Laurentiis Studios, based off the Golden Coast. Using the O'Bannon and Shusett script, Patrick Swayze, fresh off the success of Dirty Dancing, was considered for the role of Quaid before Richard Dreyfuss was attached to star in the project. Bruce Beresford was also slated to direct, but the project didn't go through. Later on, David Cronenberg became attached to direct with William Hurt in mind to star, but Cronenberg and Shusett locked horns over how the film was to be done. Cronenberg wanted it to stay close to the Philip K. Dick story, while Shusett wanted to go for a Raiders of the Lost Ark Goes to Mars approach. While Cronenberg's version wasn't made and credited for the final film, he did present the idea of the mutants, which would be seen in the final product. De Laurentiis lost enthusiasm for the project after the movie Dune flopped at the box office, and shortly after, De Laurentiis' studio shut down. But that would not be the last for Total Recall. Afterwards, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who unsuccessfully approached De Laurentiis to star in the film, persuaded Carolco to buy the film from the Italian producer for $3 million. To star in it, Arnold was paid around 10 to 11 million plus 15% of the profits. Not to mention having a huge amount of creative control over the film with veto power over the cast and crew. For the director, Schwarzenegger recruited Paul Verhoeven after being impressed with his direction of the sci-fi action of RoboCop. The script went through 47 revisions with no third act. Verhoeven hired Gary Goldman to help Shusett write the final product. For the rest of the cast, brought in were Ronnie Cox as Vilos Gohagen, the main antagonist of the film. Cox also worked for Verhoeven in RoboCop. Sharon Stone as Lori Quaid, Quaid's wife who was eventually revealed to be one of Cohagen's agents to watch him. Rachel Ticotin as Melina, Quaid's partner back in Mars, and Michael Ironside as Richter, Cohagen's sadistic right-hand man. The movie was filmed in Mexico City in the Mexico City Film Studio at Studios Churubusco. Total Recall was released on June 1st, 1990, and opened number 1 at the box office. The movie was a smashing success, making $231.3 million on a $50 to $60 million budget. The film was also well received by critics. Later on, a TV series was based on the film, Total Recall 2070, which didn't have much to do with the movie and has more similarities to Blade Runner, another movie based on a Philip K. Dick story. A sequel was planned but was never made. However, the script for it was changed drastically and was made into a movie, Minority Report, which found success with moviegoers. Total Recall will be remade in 2012 by Columbia Pictures and star Colin Farrell in the main role. Despite mixed reviews, the movie was profitable. Carolco hit it big in summer 1990 and hoped to continue the trend instead of dealing with more flops that did them no favors whatsoever. While Total Recall was a nice reprieve, they still had more motions to go through. In July 1990, Carolco formed a joint venture with New Line Cinema called Seven Arts. Through Seven Arts, New Line distributed Carolco's low to mid-budget releases, while TriStar still distributed their higher-profile movies. Seven Arts released several films over the next 2 years, which included Repossessed, King of New York, Queen's Logic, Sweet Talker, Dice Rules, Defenseless, Rambling Rose, Get Back, The Dark Wind, Ace's Iron Eagle 3, and Light Sleeper, none of which were particularly successful. The Carolco New Line pact would end in 1992. Carolco closed the summer with the release of the Vietnam action buddy comedy film Air America on August 10, 1990, starring Mel Gibson and Robert Downey Jr. as Ryek and Covington respectively, two guys who worked for a covert CIA airline during the Vietnam War, flying to give people food and rations while going through enemy fire. This was based on the 1978 non-fiction book of the same name by Christopher Robbins. Neither critics nor moviegoers were pleased with the movie, only raking in $25 million on a budget of $35 million. Carolco's next movie was released a month later on September 21, 1990, with Narrow Margin, a remake of the 1952 RKO Radio Pictures movie The Narrow Margin. The movie centers around Ann Archer as a woman who witnesses the murder of her blind date, a lawyer, by a mafia boss. Now the mob is on her trail, and her only solace is a district attorney, played by Gene Hackman, to protect her during a train ride throughout the Canadian wilderness. Critics were mixed about the movie and generally agreed that this was inferior to the 1952 version. Audiences hardly went, just making $10 million. For the 1990 holiday season, Carolco released the psychological horror movie Jacob's Ladder. Jacob Singer, as portrayed by Tim Robbins, is a Vietnam veteran who is having nightmares and bizarre hallucinations. He sets out to find the truth about the demons that haunt him. The movie also stars Elizabeth Pena as Jacob's lover Jesse, David Aiello as Jacob's friend and chiropractor Lewis, and uncredited Macaulay Culkin, right before his star turn on Home Alone, as Jacob's deceased son. Jacob's Ladder took 10 years before coming on the screen. Bruce Joel Rubin wrote the script in 1980, with Michael Apted, Ridley Scott, and Sidney Lumet all expressed interest to direct, but no major studio wanted to make this movie. In 1986, Paramount Pictures acquired Jacob's Ladder and another script that Rubin wrote that will be a big hit for Paramount, Ghost. In 1988, Adrian Lyne, coming off the success of Fatal Attraction, was slated to direct the film, but ownership and policy changes at Paramount resulted in the project being canceled. Carolco took over the project and gave Lyne more creative control alongside a budget of $25 million. For the main roles, several actors, including Al Pacino, Dustin Hoffman, and Richard Gere for Jacob, and Annie McDowell, Julia Roberts, and Madonna for Jessie, were considered before settling on Robbins and Pena. The special effects in the film were filmed with no post-production effects added in. Jacob's Ladder was released on November 2, 1990, and was well received by critics and was #1 at the box office in the first week of release at $7 million. But other films released shortly after, especially Home Alone, overshadowed the film, where attendance dropped off and overall earning just $26 million. While not exactly a profit, Jacob's Ladder was acclaimed by horror fans and has become something of a cult classic. With the summer blockbuster of Total Recall and little else, Carolco, at this point, starting to feel the sting of overspending, needed more hits and hoped 1991 would be kind to them. They kicked off the year with the romantic comedy LA Story, starring Steve Martin. Martin plays a TV weatherman named Harris K. Telemacher, who falls for a British journalist named Sarah, played by Victoria Tennant, and relies on messages from a freeway sign meant solely for him to win her over. Also starring Richie E. Grant as Sarah's husband, who tries to reconcile with her, and Sarah Jessica Parker as a ditzy woman that Harris briefly dates. The film was released on February 8, 1991. Critics raved the film, and moviegoers enjoyed it as well, making it a slight hit at $28 million. A month later, on March 1st, The Doors was released. Directed by Oliver Stone, the movie is a biopic about the 60s rock band of the same name and the life of lead singer Jim Morrison, played by Val Kilmer. Also starring were Kevin Dillon, Frank Whaley, and Kyle MacLachlan as the other band members, and Meg Ryan as Pamela Corson, Morrison's lover. For his role of Jim Morrison, Val Kilmer filmed an 8-minute music video where he performs as Jim Morrison at various points in his life and rehearsed 50 songs, which 50 of them being in the movie. While Kilmer's performance was praised, the movie itself got mixed reviews and was another underperformer, making $34.4 million on a $38 million budget. For their big summer 1991 release, Carolco put out the sequel to the 1984 sci-fi action film The Terminator, entitled Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Returning director James Cameron and stars Arnold Schwarzenegger as the T-800, this time as a good guy, and Linda Hamilton as Sarah Connor. In this new installment, the T-800 goes back in time and protects 10-year-old John Connor, played by Edward Furlong, from the liquid metal T-1000, as portrayed by Robert Patrick. When the original Terminator came out in 1984, it was a hit, making $78.4 million, not only solidifying Arnold Schwarzenegger's career, but also soaring upcoming filmmaker James Cameron to the A-list as well. He has desires to make a sequel, but the technology wasn't ready at the time. Cameron went off to make other films, such as Aliens, which proved to be successful and debatably a better sequel than the original Alien. But it was 1989's The Abyss, while not only successful, also proved that the technological advances could be done. But the bigger issues at stake were the legal rights. Hemdell owned the original rights to the Terminator and prevented Carolco from making a movie. However, in 1990, Hemdell was going through its own financial crisis, and Arnold Schwarzenegger urged Mario Kassar to bid for the rights. Carolco did, acquired him for $5 million. With the willingness of director Cameron returning, as well as Schwarzenegger and Hamilton returning to the film, they also needed to cast for the new characters. For the role of Sarah's son and future leader of the Resistance, John Connor, they looked through several actors before choosing 12-year-old Edward Furlong. This film would be his first acting job, and for the role of the antagonist and more advanced T-1000, they chose actor Robert Patrick, who made his feature film debut as a baddie in Die Hard 2. Patrick was a smaller and leaner man, more of a Porsche to Arnold's Panzer tank. Several locations were used for filming, in California and New Mexico, which included the Mojave Desert, the Santa Monica Place shopping mall, where the Terminators first meet John, flood control channels in the San Fernando Valley for the big truck chase scene with John and the Terminators early in the film, the Coral Bar and the Lakeview Medical Center in Lakeview Terrace, and the Los Angeles Long Beach Terminal Island Freeway, where the climax chase was seen. Filming took place between October 1990 and March 1991. One of the more ambitious parts of the film are the use of the CGI effects mainly used for the T-1000's liquid alloy body. Most of the key computer effects were done at Industrial Light and Magic, while the practical effects were done by the SFX guru himself, Stan Winston. It took 35 people and 10 months for the effects in the film for $5 million, adding the overall budget to $94 million. which included Schwarzenegger's paycheck of $15 million, as well as a jet plane costing around $11 to $12 million. Just prior to its release, some skeptics pondered the success of the film. While the original Terminator was a hit in 1984, it was nowhere near the top of the highest-grossing films that year, which included Ghostbusters, Indiana Jones, and the Temple of Doom, Gremlins, and The Karate Kid. Some people wondered if this would be a disaster, and if it were, it would make James Cameron look like a big moron, as well as the sinking ship that is Carolco go down hard to the bottom of the ocean. Terminator 2 Judgment Day was released on July 3, 1991, to much acclaim from the critics and audiences, praising the action, the story, and the computer effects, the most top-notch CGI offered that year. In its opening 4th of July, the movie grossed over $54 million during its 4th of July opening weekend, and overall made $519.8 million, making it the highest-earning film in 1991 and financially the most successful film for both TriStar and Carolco. The film won several awards including Best Makeup, Best Sound Editing, and Best Visual Effects at the Academy Awards. Several versions of the film were released on home video over the years, including an extended version which restored cut footage, including a scene with the original Terminator actor Michael Biehn reprising his role as Kyle Reese in a dream sequence. And even inspired an attraction at Universal Studios theme parks in 1996 called T2, Battle Across Time, which James Cameron directed and reunited stars Schwarzenegger, Patrick, Furlong, and Hamilton in their respective roles. After some lulls in their quest at becoming a major, Carolco was finally at the top. With the biggest movie in 1991, and despite their money woes, they looked forward to what 1992 had to bring. 1992 would bring the erotic thriller Basic Instinct, bringing RoboCop and Total Recall director Paul Verhoeven back to direct, and starring Michael Douglas as Nick Curran, a detective who investigates a murder of a rock star and sets him on path on an intense relationship with Catherine Trammell, as portrayed by Sharon Stone. The script was written by Joe Eszterhas, who has penned such successful movies like Flashdance and Jagged Edge, as well as writing Carolco's Music Box back in 1989. It was so red hot, it resulted in a bidding war. Andrew G. Vajna even participated in it, offering to produce it under his new Synergy Pictures label, but eventually Carolco won the battle for $3 million. Many actors were considered for the main roles. For Detective Curran, Chuck Norris, Al Pacino, Harrison Ford, Wesley Snipes, Robert De Niro, Mel Gibson, Bruce Willis, Sylvester Stallone, Christopher Lloyd, Jack Nicholson, Charlie Sheen, Richard Gere, John Travolta, Nicolas Cage, Denzel Washington, and Kevin Costner were all considered, and for Trammell, Kim Basinger, Julia Roberts, Greta Scacchi, Meg Ryan, Michelle Pfeiffer, Gina Davis, Kathleen Turner, Ellen Barkin, Mario Hemingway, and Demi Moore before Douglas and Stone got the parts. Whew. Basic Instinct was released on March 20th, 1992. The critics were mixed, and also the film itself garnered controversy by LGBT groups, specifically lesbians and bisexuals, because Catherine Trammell was a murderer and a bisexual, even going so far as picketing theaters to prevent people from seeing it, but the moviegoers told them to go eat fish. Also, another scene shows Sharon Stone crossing her legs, revealing some muchacha, adding further controversy. However, all of those didn't deter the movie-watching audience, as Basic Instinct made $15 million in its opening weekend and making over $352.9 million on a $49 million budget, making it not only a smashing success, but also one of the highest-grossing films that year, only behind Aladdin, The Bodyguard, and Home Alone 2 Lost in New York. Releasing two big movies, Carolco was sitting high and mighty on the top of the mountain, but unfortunately the peak was starting to crumble, as they were still in a financial hole, not to mention that they were in this position before, releasing some hits before wading through more bombs. There was still much more at stake if they were trying to become a major. For their big summer 1992 release, they brought out the sci-fi action of Universal Soldier, starring the Belgian kickboxer Jean-Claude Van Damme and the Swedish big guy Dolph Lundgren, and directed by the German filmmaker Roland Emmerich. In the film, Van Damme and Lundgren played two soldiers in Vietnam who kill each other, and 20-something years later, they are brought back to life by the Universal Soldier Program, a government program where dead soldiers get revived and use them to fight terrorists. Unfortunately, Van Damme and Lundgren recovered their memories. Van Damme's Luke Devereaux was just a soldier who was ready to go home, while Lundgren's Andrew Scott went psycho and started killing soldiers and innocent Vietnamese villagers, and the two would clash throughout the movie. Universal Soldier was released on July 10, 1992. Critics did not like the movie, but the film was a modest hit, earning $36.3 million on a $23 million budget. Despite being profitable, it was disappointing for Carolco, who was hoping for it to be the Total Recall or Terminator 2 of the summer of 1992. In late 1992, the Oscar season, Carolco brought out Chaplin, the biopic of the mustachio, baggy pants, and tiny hat-wearing silent film star Charlie Chaplin, with Robert Downey Jr. playing the role, and featuring Dan Aykroyd as Mac Sennett, Kevin Kline as Douglas Fairbanks, Marissa Tomei as Mabel Normand, and Penelope Ann Miller as Edna Purviance. The film was directed by Richard Attenborough, the established British actor and director who took the helm of the award-winning Gandhi a decade earlier. However, he would not repeat the success of that movie when Chaplin was released on Christmas Day 1992, where it bombed, just making $9.4 million on a $31 million budget. Critics were lukewarm, but did praise the production values and Downey's performance as Chaplin. Before the year closed, Carolco, close to bankruptcy, went through a corporate restructuring plan involving France's Le Studio Canal Plus, Japan's Pioneer LDCA Incorporated, and Italy's RCS Video International Services, as well as Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, who will own 16% of the company through its stocks and acquire the distribution to Carolco's films once the TriStar deal ends in 1994. In 1993, Carolco released her only movie that year, the action film Cliffhanger, bringing back Sylvester Stallone, who was in a bit of a slump after the disappointment that was Rocky V, trying his hand at comedy in the films Oscar and Stop, or My Mom Will Shoot, which also proved to be duds. The movie was Stallone as Gabe Walker, a mountain climber, still distraught over the death of one of his friends early on, assigned to help some people, but those people are not really stranded, but instead are terrorists, led by John Lithgow as Eric Quaylen, who want to use Gabe to help find suitcases full of money that they lost after a failed airplane heist. Originally, Stallone had signed on to do a comedy with John Candy about feuding neighbors that was to be directed by John Hughes, but that was dropped. And considering John Hughes was starting to become a shell of his former self, with going from making hit movies about high schoolers going through crisis to more broad family comedies, and Stallone and his comedic acting experiences, yeah, that was one bullet dodged and dodged well. So instead, he signed on for Cliffhanger. Also for director, the Finnish Rennie Harlin was brought in, and like Stallone, was brought in after another project from Carolco was dropped, an action film that was to be described as Die Hard in a Hurricane. But that proved to be too expensive, and Rennie agreed to make Cliffhanger. Harlan had some success, with A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, and Die Hard 2 under his belt. The movie had a $65 million budget, including a $1 million stunt where one of the characters was transferred between two planes. However, the financially dwindling Carolco found itself strapped for cash, too short to keep funding the film. With their new foreign partners to help with the funding, they also went to TriStar, who helped provide funding for half of the film's budget in exchange for full distribution rights in North America, Japan for television, Mexico, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, and France. Carolco would end up getting the short end of the stick big time, but with their financial woes, had little choice. Cliffhanger was released on May 28, 1993. Despite the critics and moviegoers enjoying the film, raking in $225 million, Carolco saw very little of the profits. That same year, Carolco had no choice but to sell its shares in Live Entertainment to a group of investors led by Pioneer. In that October, the film company The Vista Organization would merge with Carolco. In 1994, Carolco released a John Candy, Richard Lewis Western comedy, Wagons East, and the movie of a group of settlers, including Lewis, are not satisfied with their living situation in the West and wish to go back east. So they hire alcoholic wagon master James Harlow, as portrayed by Candy, to take them where they need to go. The movie has the distinction of the film John Candy died while making it, having a fatal heart attack in his sleep in a motel in Mexico on March 4, 1994. Wagons East came out 5 months later on August 26, 1994. Critics and film audiences weren't pleased with the movie, just earning $4.4 million. This will be the last Carolco movie distributed by TriStar Pictures. Their second and final release that year was the sci-fi adventure Stargate. being the first Carolco movie released by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. The film was directed by Roland Emmerich and stars Kurt Russell and James Spader. Russell as U.S. Air Force Colonel Jack O'Neill and Spader as Dr. Daniel Jackson, an archaeologist and linguist, go alongside a group of men through a portal, the Stargate, into another world, with the atmosphere and the people like ancient Egyptians who worship the sun god Ra, played by the Crying Game's Jay Davison, who turns out to be an evil ruler. The movie was released on October 28, 1994. The critics were mixed, but the audiences enjoyed it more, making it a smash success at $196.5 million on a $55 million budget. Sequels were planned but never made. However, the film launched a franchise for MGM, leading to the Showtime series Stargate SG-1 3 years later, and eventually led to spin-offs and a couple of TV movies. Carolco was still losing money, however, and it was about to reach to the point of do or die for them. Going to 1995, Carolco needed a smash hit that would put them back on the map again. They had to carefully decide which project to fund, because it was not like the 1980s, where they could offer their stars a ton of money and make several projects. They were in a hole, and the dirt was slowly building up and suffocating them. They needed to hand the shovel to the right people to dig them out. If they made the wrong choice, those people would just bash their skulls in with the shovel. Carolco had taken several risks in their history, which included changing up Rambo and hoping Terminator 2 will top the 1984 original. But this time, they had little to give and everything to lose. The two projects that Carolco had to choose from: Crusade, the epic medieval action film with Arnold Schwarzenegger attached to star and Paul Verhoeven to direct, and Cutthroat Island, the pirate adventure to be directed by Rennie Harlin and to star his wife, Gina Davis, then known for romantic comedies, and was hoping to become a big action star. Trying to figure it out, Carolco set up a meeting with Schwarzenegger and Verhoeven to talk about their film. It was expensive indeed, budgeted at $100 million, and Carolco, low on funds, needed a guarantee that they would not go over budget. This didn't sit well with the Dutch director, causing him to freak out and scream at the staff that he could not promise such guarantees. And Arnold, watching the filmmaker go irate, knew that the project was dead. After that, Carolco decided to go with Cutthroat Island, a slightly cheaper project at $98 million. For Gina Davis' co-star, Michael Douglas was originally cast. However, egos ran rampant as Douglas wasn't happy that Gina Davis was getting more screen time than he was. He wanted to be equal to her, but not after getting what he wanted. He quit the project. Now without a leading man, Rennie Harlin went on the search, looking at different actors, including Tom Cruise, Keanu Reeves, Liam Neeson, Jeff Bridges, Ralph Fiennes, Charlie Sheen, Michael Keaton, Tim Robbins, Daniel Day-Lewis, and Gabriel Byrne, with them turning down the role before signing on Matthew Modine. Matthew Modine had some notable film credits, including Birdie and Full Metal Jacket, but was not exactly at the top of the A-list, but he did have the advantage in learning how to fence. After signing on Modine, Harlan shifted his focuses back on the production of the movie and noted that the pirate ship built while he was out casting wasn't built to his standards. Unhappy, he had them rebuild the ship, but that would be amongst the several problems that would plague the production. From Harlan disputing with a cameraman, firing him and leading to several crew members quitting, to a fire on the ship and raw sewage breaking into the water tank the actors were intended to swim in. Cutthroat Island was a bit of a troubled production, sucking through Carolco's pockets even more. Meanwhile, at Carolco headquarters, they had two other projects in the works. The Western adventure Last of the Dogmen, with Tom Berenger and Paul Verhoeven direct the Showgirls. The Work Your Way to the Top story starring Elizabeth Berkley, the former Saved by the Bell star, proving she's all grown up by playing a girl who starts off as a girl, who goes from stripper to showgirl. Something to make a man screech. To get more money, Carolco sold off the two productions to the French textile and communications company Chargeurs, where the films would be released by Savoy Pictures and United Artists respectively, in the fall of 1995. Not that the film was successful, although Showgirls did become a cult classic later on, but that wouldn't be enough. On November 1995, Carolco, who just a few years ago was on top of the world with Terminator 2 and Basic Instinct, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, bringing an end to an overambitious company known for big motion pictures and big spending. Meanwhile, on December 22, 1995, Cutthroat Island was released in theaters, critics gave mixed to negative reviews, and the film girls didn't flock to the picture, just making $10 million. At the time, Cutthroat Island became the biggest flop in Hollywood history, later on surpassed by 47 Ronin in 2013. Cutthroat Island was such a big failure, it not only killed Carolco, but also hurt Geena Davis's career big time, making her much less of a bankable star than she was in the early 90s with her roles in Thelma and Louise and A League of Their Own, as well as killing the pirate movie genre for a long time until Disney revived it with Pirates of the Caribbean in 2003. It also arguably hurt Geena Davis and Rennie Harlan's marriage, leading them to divorce in 1998. The only people who really didn't feel the burn was MGM and the film's composer, John Debney, whose soundtrack was highly praised and still to this day has a very successful career in composing music for Hollywood. Cutthroat Island would quietly sail out of theaters. Meanwhile, Carolco's assets, including their library, were up for sale. 20th Century Fox had agreed to buy them for $50 million, but the former Carolco investor Canal Plus made a $58 million bid for it, and Fox, lowering the price to $47.5 million, dropped the deal. The other assets would be sold to other companies. To this day, Canal owns the Carolco Library, licensing the North American home video rights to Live Entertainment, who became Artisan Entertainment in 1998 until being bought and absorbed by Lionsgate in 2003, with whom the home video rights are still held, with Lionsgate licensing the Canadian video rights to Entertainment One, while in other countries, different companies hold the rights. North American television rights are owned by Paramount Pictures through Trifecta Entertainment and Media, which they gained after Spelling Television's World Vision Enterprises got the rights to Carolco's movies in 1992. The theatrical rights are split between Sony Pictures and Rialto Pictures, acting on behalf of Canal Plus. Exceptions include Cliffhanger, owned by Sony Pictures outright, after the TriStar deal during production. Aces Iron Eagle 3, owned by Warner Brothers Entertainment, via New Line Cinema. Canal owns the other Seven Arts films. Last of the Dogmen, owned by NBC Universal, by way of Focus Features, after implementing the Savoy Library, and Showgirls, owned by MGM in North America and Path in all other regions. So the big question is, why is it that Koko Pictures, the company responsible for churning out such mega hits as the Rambo franchise, Total Recall, Terminator 2 and Basic Instinct, rise and fall? They were one of the first companies to focus on foreign distribution, knowing that overseas moviegoers brought in the cash. However, that wouldn't matter as the company blew for the money for unnecessary investments, like the parties, the fireworks talking about the movie deals, the massive paychecks to the actors, even including buying Arnold that jet plane for T2, even some yachts for the Cannes film festivals. With them spending like crazy, their flops did them no favors. Look between the lines after their hit films. For every Rambo, there was an Extreme Prejudice and Pound Puppies and The Legend of Big Paul. For every Total Recall, there was an Air America and Narrow Margin. For every Terminator 2, there were The Doors and Chaplin. All of this money being lost, leaving their pockets empty, do beg several questions going to deciding to choose between making Cutthroat Island and Crusade. What if Crusade was made? Sure, it was slightly more expensive than Cutthroat Island, but it had the power of name recognition with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Paul Verhoeven, and in a business where big names mean something. Crusade would have been a big winner at the box office. Or going back to Cutthroat Island, what if Michael Douglas had stayed on? Or if not him, what if they had gotten a bigger star than Matthew Modine? He wasn't the biggest star in the world, and again, big names mean big money. Would it have saved Cutthroat Island, or would it have not made a difference? Because remember, in 1991 and 1992, despite the massively successful releases of Terminator 2 and Basic Instinct, they were in the hole, thanks to extravagant spending, meaning they had shot themselves in the foot one too many times. And as we know, keep damaging your foot like that, it will eventually end up pretty worthless, even dead, and that's what Carolco did. Just spent themselves into oblivion. Climbing out of the ashes of his former company, Mario Kassar went to work for Paramount. In 1997, Kassar was the executive producer for the drama film Lolita, directed by Jacob's Ladder's Adrian Lin and starring Jeremy Irons and Dominique Swain. Meanwhile, Indrajit Vajna was struggling at his own Synergy Pictures, where the bombs, such as Color of the Night, Judge Dredd, The Scarlet Letter, and Evita, overcame their only two hits, Tombstone and Die Hard with a Vengeance, and shut down in 1998. That same year, both men reunited and formed C2 Pictures. It was solely founded to produce Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, which was commissioned after both men reacquired half of the rights for $7.5 million, as well as purchasing the other half from Gale and Hurd. Arnold Schwarzenegger was offered to play the part, but turned it down after learning that James Cameron is not involved in the project. However, he eventually changed his mind when Cameron offered his blessing to make the sequel. Arnie was running to be the governor of California at the time, so in order to appease the press, he was able to promote Proposition 49, which advocated for increased extracurricular activity in the California public school system. Production for the movie was expensive, with an estimated budget of $170 million. Schwarzenegger received a salary of $29.25 million, plus 20% of the profits, although he agreed to defer part of his salary in order to prevent the relocation of the set to Vancouver, British Columbia, from Los Angeles. The movie was co-funded by C2 Pictures and Intermedia, and was released in the US by Warner Bros. Pictures and Sony Pictures overseas. The movie was released on July 2, 2003 to positive reviews from critics, and was a box office success worldwide. Despite this feat, it did not match or even surpass the success of T2. It was seen as the inferior sequel to the Terminator franchise, until Salvation and Genesis, of course. Kassar and Vajna continued to make investments into other films, until C2 went dormant after losing the rights of the Terminator franchise to the Halcyon Company. This happened during the production of Season 1 of the Sarah Connor Chronicles. Hope for C2 Pictures staying alive were gone after the failure of Basic Instinct 2 at the box office. Kassar and Vajna split again, and C2 Pictures officially ceased to exist. Mario Kassar went back to producing and investing, while Vajna became government commissioner in charge of the Hungarian film industry. But that doesn't mean all surprises were officially gone yet. And indeed you are, Carolco. Indeed you are. On January 20th, 2015, Koko Pictures was finally resurrected after a little-known company named Bricktop Productions acquired the use of the Carolco name. It was also announced that Mario Kassar returned to serve as the chairman of the board of directors for the revived Carolco. One of the projects that are announced for Carolco is an English-language remake of Audition, the 1999 Japanese film directed by Takashi Miike, which is based on the 1997 novel of the same name. This is both an exciting and bittersweet return to form for Carolco, as one of the most innovative and ambitious film companies in history is back for a second chance. Hopefully, Kassar will learn his lesson from last time and stay away from overspending on films. Think about it. We are given another opportunity to enjoy the over-the-top blockbuster-churning action that is Carolco. It made a few blunders here and there. Excuse me, a lot. But their hits were exhilarating, extravagant, enticing, endearing, and overall excellent, all while standing on the verge of the brink of badassery. That is what Carolco stood for, folks. Welcoming innovation while entertaining moviegoers around the world.